Welcome, and thank you for attending Between the Lines of Sports and Criminal Justice, presented by Gideon's Promise and Team Bailey. I am Nzinga Shaw, Chief Inclusion and Diversity Officer for Starbucks, but prior to Starbucks, I enjoyed a long career in sports across 3 platforms: Major League Baseball, the National Football League, and the National Basketball Association. For our attendees, please use the question and answer function on the Zoom, as our panelists will be answering questions from the audience later, and we really encourage you to use this function so it can be a collaborative conversation. And now I'd like to introduce our panelists. First up, we have Champ Bailey. Champ, you can turn your screen on right now. Champ is a former NFL cornerback. He played college football for the University of Georgia and was drafted by the Washington football team in the first round of the 1999 draft. Champ later played for the Denver Broncos for 10 years before retiring from the NFL in 2014. He was selected to 12 Pro Bowls in his career, the most ever for a cornerback. In 2019, he was elected to the Pro Football Hall of Fame in his first year of eligibility. That's amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today, Champ.
Thanks for having me.
Next up, I'd like to introduce Thabo Sefolosha. Thabo is a 14-year National Basketball Association veteran from Switzerland who spent this season playing for the Houston Rockets before COVID-19 put the NBA season on hold. In 2015, he suffered a fractured fibula and ligament damage and was forced to miss the rest of the 2015 NBA season and the entire postseason due to an encounter with the New York Police City Department. Thabo was acquitted by a jury and won his lawsuit against the police department for their actions. Thabo, it's great to see you again. Please give your wife Bertil my best, and I look forward to a great conversation today. Last but certainly not least, I'd like to welcome Domonique Foxworth to the conversation. Domonique is a senior writer for The Undefeated, as well as a writer and commentator for ESPN, who can be seen and heard across a multitude of platforms, including television, radio, podcasts, and much more. Domonique played college football at the University of Maryland and professionally in the National Football League for the Denver Broncos, the Atlanta Falcons, and the Baltimore Ravens. During his career, he held a number of positions within the NFL Players Association, ultimately as president. Thank you, Domonique, for being here, and welcome everyone to this conversation. So I want to start this conversation by asking the same question to each panelist, and it's around the importance of the sports industry and what sports means to society as a whole. And I ask that question because, you know, when I was working in the sports industry, I was always amazed by how many people would come out to support a local game. Whether it was Major League Baseball or an NFL game or an NBA game, I looked around the audience and I just saw the stands filled with people that came from a variety of backgrounds. You look and you see a range of people, whether they're old or young or black or white or any color in between, any sexual orientation, different abilities. It's amazing how sports can draw crowds from such a vast group of people. And so athletes, because you have the ability to touch so many different people in society, you're oftentimes viewed and looked upon as leaders. Whether you choose to take that position or not, that's how your fans look at you. And so my question for all of the gentlemen on this call today is, how much pressure do you receive from fans, not only as a sports figure, but also when it comes to taking a stance on criminal and social justice issues? What type of pressure do you feel? Champ, let's start with you.
Well, thanks for that question. First and foremost, I think, you know, it's a little unnecessary pressure, right? I think people get a little, I think it's a little confusing about who should really be responsible. And I think it's a society issue, right? But what that burden ends up landing on is our shoulders as young athletes, young men trying to figure out who we are, really not mature enough to handle that burden. And then, you know, I compare it to, you know, when I go back home or when I got in the league early on, I was 20 years old when I got drafted. And, one of the things that people always come to me about, what are you doing back home? Have you done this, done that? It's always breaking bread and writing a check for something. I'm like, well, I guess this is the way it is. As a Black man, we tend to carry the burden of our community on our backs. When we step out, we're responsible. So we're used to that. And I think it's uncalled for in one right, because yes, we want to use our platform, but really, do we really know how to fix the problems? No. So I go back home a few years and put band-aids on things, but really the systemic racism continues. Those struggles still continue. And I'm not knowledgeable enough at that time to understand. Now, as I've gotten older, the knowledge is there. I'm not as distracted as I used to be. I can look back, but I do know my brand was bigger when I played. When you're playing, there's nothing bigger about your brand when you're active. I mean, that's the most important time in your career, really in your life, to really, build that platform and utilize it. But at the same time, you're so young, you really don't know how. So it's, you wish that, when you look at an athlete, you don't just start and settle with him. You look above him. Who's he working for? Who else can he influence that really has some influence in the community? And it's usually the owners and, executives that run these local teams.
That's such a great perspective that you gave. I think oftentimes we forget that athletes enter the league so young. I mean, 20 years as a baby. And these issues are so great and so massive that it is absolutely unfair to put that level of stress on a person who is just coming into adulthood. So
Right.
thank you for that perspective, because I think we forget that sometimes. Thabo, how would you answer that question?
I think, Champ said it all. It's not necessarily because you're good at basketball or football or any other, athletic feat or anything like this. Or even artists, I think hip hop artists, sometimes they look up as, people that can really speak for the community. But, it's a burden, like he says, that is not necessarily fitted for everyone. And oftentimes, we are almost pressured, that we have to do something and, act a certain way, do certain things. So you definitely feel that pressure, But I think also the other side of that question, I think, was, the pressure that you feel from the fans sometimes, as far as just being able to speak your mind. I think that's one thing, and especially in football, we saw with Kaepernick. So I think that's another pressure that you feel as an athlete, as somebody with, a platform. You definitely have to be careful with what you say and what you do at all time, nowadays.
I think that's right. And I think there's also consequences on both sides. And sometimes athletes have to remember that while they feel personally convicted, they also have an organization that they work for. And so you really got to figure out how to balance both sides. And it can be very confusing. And it can definitely cause a lot of pressure. Domonique, how do you feel about this question? How would you address this topic?
I think that it's unfair, obviously, to have that expectation of young men, but I think it's even more unfair to have the expectation of Black men. Like we have the world kind of turned on its head in that we expect the people who have these wrongs perpetrated against them to also fix the problem and not the people who have benefited from it. So I think, unfortunately, we don't live in a world where the people who benefit from it are willing to take responsibility and proactively address these things. So it falls on us. And I think Howard Bryant, a sports writer, wrote a really good book a few years ago that I read called The Heritage, that talks about the history of Black athletes in activism. And many years ago, you go back to Paul Robeson and people like that, those are the people who, the first Black people to have any sort of power and prestige and influence and money in much of the Black community. And that's kind of how they got, not forced into, but the expectation fell on them to lead for social justice issues. And I think that was something that was carried on through Jim Brown, Bill Russell, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, all the way up until a period where kind of the I'm not Black, I'm OJ situation started, and that period up and through Jordan, building a brand that was not necessarily focused on social justice. But it's come back around with guys like Thabo and Kaepernick, and it seems that we're kind of back at a new height for athletes taking control. So it makes me proud and happy to be a part of that fraternity, but it always, like, I don't ever want to let it go by with us thinking it's our expectation that Black people fix the Black community when the problem isn't with the Black community. The expectation should be for white people to fix the white community, honestly.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think we see that happening in modern times. We see that happening right now amidst what's been going on over the past several weeks, where people are being asked to bring solutions to the table, but they are the victims. They are the people that are experiencing the oppression. And so it's an extra burden to be oppressed and then have to come up with solutions for a system that you didn't break. So you raise a very important point. Next question, I'll address this one to all three gentlemen as well. I think it's an important question to ask. For each of you, what was the tipping point in your life or an experience that you had in the sports sector that made you come to the realization where you said, the time is now. I have to address this publicly now. Thabo, let's start with you.
Sorry, I think for me it was pretty obvious, the incident in New York opened my eyes to a lot of things. I came in the US in that sense of, in a bubble in a way, just playing in the NBA, it's not a normal lifestyle. I'm not necessarily on a day-to-day basis, faced with everyday, problem that people have, so, but that incident in New York really opened my eyes to a lot of things. I was always curious with the history and everything that happened in the US, but it made me dive in a lot deeper and just understanding a little bit, what were the reasons, where they came from, and especially in 2015, for something like this to happen, when I remember being a kid and understanding what had happened with Rodney King and all of this, and just to experience something like this in for us, what we call modern day time, it was just, there's a lot more to be done in my opinion.
And Thabo, I remember that situation vividly. You and I were both a part of the Atlanta Hawks franchise when that took place. And all of my interactions with you, I remember, were extremely positive, and you were always kind and it's really just a gentle giant. And so when that happened, I remember that our franchise, we were shocked and rocked to the core because we know your nature and we know the type of person that you are, and could only assume that the actors on the other side were certainly in the wrong. And so, I just appreciate your strength in that moment. I appreciate you coming back to the franchise with positive energy and really using your voice in that moment to talk about these things, even though they weren't popular topics to talk about. So just thank you for your leadership through that issue.
Thank you.
Domonique, how would you answer that question? What was the moment? What was the tipping point for you when you said, I'm going to use my platform and I'm going to speak out loud?
Yeah, I mean, my platform, it was funny when Champ was saying how your brand and attention is never as high as when you were a player. I was not the player that Champ was or Thabo. So no one really, very few people, I would say, were looking for me. So there was no real turning point. Like, I kind of always remember feeling like there was some obligation or responsibility to do what you can with what you have. And I think in my post career, I actually have, with like being on TV and ESPN, I actually have more reach now than I had back then. So to be honest with you, I don't frankly remember a time where I didn't strive to want to do something. Even all the way back to college, there were opportunities to get involved, and I would take those opportunities up. And I think that's something that, and it maybe Champ feels the same way. Maybe it's partially because of the coming from a different country for Thabo. But being here in America, a Black person in America raised by Black parents who were proud of their Blackness, it kind of was always something that it's like when you have something, you give to the people that you care about.
And I really appreciate you for bringing that point up, because I think oftentimes we assume that a tragedy has to happen or some type of trauma has to occur for us to use our voice or to become active. But to your point, many of us have been raised by parents who were part of the civil rights movement and grew up in the 60s and in the 70s in a time where where using their voices was critically important to advancing culture and society. And so if we're raised by people that instill that in us in a young age, then it only becomes natural that we behave that way through our journeys. So thank you for bringing that point to the table. Champ, you know, you're a 12-time Pro Bowler. That's crazy. I've been to the Pro Bowl one time, and it's so hard for players to get there once. 12 times. I mean, over a decade of playing at that level, and then ultimately being inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So you've really achieved some of the greatest success that NFL players, most of them will never get to that point. You know, for you, what was your tipping moment? What, you know, you could have easily just said, you know, I'm a successful athlete. I'm going to look away. I don't have to get involved in this stuff. I'll just enjoy my success and hope that the world works itself out. But you didn't do that. You specifically inserted yourself in these issues. So why?
Well, I'm naturally born into it, first of all. And, you know, it's like Domonique said, it's about 1,000 moments. You know, it's not one. You know, I think for everybody now, you know, I think the visual effects of, you know, video and seeing things happen and play out in real time, and, you know, you get to play it back over and over. I think those things really heighten the awareness. But for me, I mean, I experienced it all my life on some level. You know, obviously things temper down when you become somebody. Yeah, you get a bigger name, you're now a pro athlete. Yes, things simmer down a little. And even when I speak out now, people always want to remind me, hey, but you're a Hall of Famer and this and that. I'm like, well, I'm not speaking for myself. You know, it's not about me. Like it's about the people that I grew up with and their kids that they're raising and my boys. You know, it's never about me. Yeah, I'm fine. Even though I deal with something on some level, other people are dealing with it way harder than I am. You know, so it's never about me. So I just wish people would understand these moments are a collection of moments in our lives. It's not just one thing.
Yeah, and what you're saying is important because it just reminds us that we have to reach back, and we can't forget where we came from. We can ascend to the highest heights, but some of us started from the bottom. You can't forget about that journey, and you can't negate that it really built you and it really helped to prepare you for the moment that you're in now. So thank you so much. Thabo, you talked to us about the unfortunate incident that took place in New York City. And I won't ask you to go through the details, but what I will ask is around what's happening in society right now. So, you know, 2015, here you are, young, fairly new in the NBA, enjoying success in your career, and you have a very unfortunate encounter with New York City police, in which you were injured, physically injured and unable to finish your season, which is probably one of the most devastating things that you had to go through. Between then and now, so we're now in 2020, and we are watching a series of incidents take place on TV involving Black bodies. So whether it's Black men, Black women, Black bodies being subject to harm at the hands of law enforcement. And we're seeing it play out in many different places across the country, if not across the world. Why do you think that we are still witnessing these atrocities on camera 5 years later? I mean, really for the collective journey of Black people being in this country, but why do you think this is still going on in the year 2020?
Well, I think you just said it. You know, I think it's part of the history, but it's part of a history that's hard to talk about. You know, for obvious reason, I think it's painful on both sides. And, you know, but I think until we really go to the root of, you know, why, you know, the police needs to, you know, entrap people in those situations and why the neighborhoods stay the way they are, you know, for somebody that comes from outside of the US, you know, it's especially shocking because you hear of America being, you know, the land of the free, you know, and you know, experiencing something like this and just seeing, I wasn't shocked, you know, in a way because, you know, I mean, it was at a time where, you know, more and more police brutality cases were coming on video, and we were, seeing them, on TV and on social media. So it's just the, I think it will keep continuing until we really address the root issue of what's causing all this.
That's right. We have to get to the bottom of the root in order for things to change. Domonique, I think it's so interesting that you have so many different attributes that you bring to the table, specifically with regard to your writing and with regard to your interaction with media and utilizing the platform of media to tell important stories. And so my question for you is regarding the Undefeated. And thinking about the topics that come up, I can only imagine the range of topics that are presented. How do you finalize which topics actually make it to the episodes? And how do you ensure that they resonate with what's happening in society today?
Yeah, so it's pretty easy when it comes to the Undefeated. The Undefeated is a subsidiary of ESPN that's focused on the intersection of race, sports, and culture. So the issues that pertain to Black people is something that we focus on there with the writing and the episodes for the internet that we do. But it's been interesting with like ESPN with doing Get Up and First Take and all the ESPN shows more regularly now, that it's been so easy in the past few months to bring up issues that pertain to Black people because it seems like something's changed in the country. It's momentary probably, but there was a time where we can all remember not too long ago when Jemele Hill ended up leaving ESPN because the network wanted to push us away from things that they called political, even though they weren't necessarily political. It was just about truth and honesty, frankly. But now we're in a place that just because of the George Floyd situation, and we all exist in this environment, in this society, and the society really determines what is okay for us to do and say. And honestly, in this moment, I remember the Monday after George Floyd, I was on the morning show on ESPN, Get Up, and they asked us about it because players were talking about it. And I kind of went off a little bit. And I remember thinking like, all right, I'll find something else to do. Like this is the end of my time at ESPN. But I was surprised with like the reaction I got was the opposite. Everyone was like, yeah, this is what we want at this moment. So I don't know what happened, but it feels like we all noticed that there weren't just Black people in the streets, and there were a lot of people and everyone was focused on it. It feels like we're in a moment right now where it's easier. It's never going to be easy, but it's easier to address these topics that make most people uncomfortable.
I guess I have a follow-up question to that because it's so interesting. I remember when Jemele was going through that situation and she used her personal Twitter page to make some comments about her opinions regarding elected officials, and it really went to the left very quickly for her. But I think you're right. I think that in this moment, the times have changed and people are doing that more frequently without less retribution and retaliation for those efforts. Do you think that COVID-19 has anything to do with this movement? The fact that we have been thrown into a state of being still and really not allowed to interact with people on an interpersonal basis. So we have no choice but to sit at home and to really just lean into these issues and watch television and read newspapers and spend more time being intentional about understanding issues. Has COVID-19 forced us into a state to be so still that we have no choice but to be more aware?
Yeah, I feel like that's the best explanation I could come up with. I'm not going to pretend like I understand how societies work necessarily, but it feels like that was a big part of the perfect storm that led to this moment and this momentary shift that we were all still. We didn't have anywhere to go, anything to do. We had our TVs on at home while we're working, and the George Floyd video keeps popping up, and people respond to that, and there was no explanation. If you were trying to find some place to hide your feelings about it, you couldn't hide it because you're watching it and you recognize how unnecessary it is. It's something that many of us have been aware of for a long time, but I do think that was the chief factor that allowed for this moment to kind of changed society or the public opinion for this split second. Because I mean, obviously don't think that it's going to stay this way, but it was and still is fading, like an interesting moment, a unique moment where people gave a damn what Black people had to say about Black issues and well, not Black issues, about American issues, and people seemed to be willing and interested to take some sort of action, and that was unique. I don't think that would have come about without the stillness, as you put it, of quarantining that we all were going through and still are going through.
That's right. And to your point, it's not just Black issues, it's human rights issues.
Mhm.
And we're being forced to address them. Champ, you are born and raised in Georgia. Georgia is such a great state. And, I just came from Atlanta. I recently moved to Seattle. So I enjoyed my time in Georgia very much. I'm an alumna of Spelman College and
Okay.
can appreciate the history that city brings to our nation in terms of being the capital of civil rights, the home of Dr. King. We just lost two phenomenal giants in civil rights with Congressman John Lewis and Reverend C.T. Vivian's recent passing. But Atlanta and Georgia just happens to be such an important place. Being from Georgia, how important is it for public defenders included in the national criminal justice reform movement who work for the betterment of the communities they represent? Like, how important is it for these folks to be on the front lines of making things better?
Well, I think it's very important. For one, I think the system, as we've mentioned, is sort of set up against minorities in general. So, we never know where to go or how to defend ourselves or how to keep ourselves out of trouble. Because once we're in the system, now those problems become 10 times worse. And, I always felt like it reminded me a lot of the experiences growing up and the people I watched go in the system, come out, go in, come out. And I always wondered, why did they always go in the system and they're right back in? And it was violating probation, violating parole, or it was always little things that they would do. But one thing that always made sense to me is everybody was just trying to eat, everybody's just trying to keep a roof over their head. And I think, until people understand that and show some compassion towards that, we need public defenders to keep us out of jail, to keep us out of the system. And, it always resonated with me. I mean, it hits so close to home because we can all talk about somebody we knew that got caught up in the system. I mean, I can name 10 guys I grew up with that are locked up right now. It's unfortunate, but, once they got caught in it, they couldn't get out of it. And it became part of their lifestyle.
Yeah, and I think public defenders, I don't think that they get their due credit. They work many hours and are very highly underpaid and really do this work because it's deeply rooted in their heart and it's their passion, more so than any other accolade or financial gain that they could get from the work. And to your point, they are so critically important to help defend, because a lot of the people that utilize public defenders don't have a means or access to financial resources that would allow them to have a private attorney. And so that means that they don't get the right to be defended in the most legal and just ways that any human being should be afforded. So you're absolutely right. These public defenders are critical and super helpful in society.
Absolutely.
What are some of the outreach ideas that you've heard from sporting figures? So I'm sure that you come across a variety of athletes, not just from the National Football League, but you talk to athletes all of the time because of the platform that you are currently working in. So what are some of the outreach ideas that you've heard from these sporting figures who are working specifically on ways to support their local communities?
Yeah, so I actually just talked to safety for the Chiefs, Tyrann Mathieu, who is doing something that I think there are a lot of ideas out there that aren't necessarily unique, which doesn't mean that they don't work or they aren't important. But I think when I talked to Tyrann, it was a unique idea because he was just trying to build relationships, and he was willing to. He's from New Orleans and he works in Kansas City now, but he set up FaceTimes with young teenagers in the New Orleans area, and that's where he's from. And he was just trying to build relationship with the guys, and there's no particular goal at the end of it except for getting to know them, letting them know that he cares about them, and trying to honestly push them in directions that he thought was helpful for them, and just being there for them. I think that's one of the most important things that we can do. And obviously there are other things like education and with the work that Gideon's Promise is doing with public defenders, there's lots of other ways you can address these issues. But I do think that one of the things we forget is about the emotional issues. It doesn't always have to be kind of the bread and butter of like, we have to improve education, we have to improve housing. Like these are all important things that need to be addressed, but also having someone in your house, because that's what he said he had. His mother abandoned him. He was raised by his grandparents until they died, and then his uncle brought him in, and his uncle was a UPS driver, and his aunt was a nurse. So he ended up going into something like a middle-class home where he felt like he got the love that he needed, that took him off the path to jail, which is where his father is now. So I think that his own experience taught him that you don't have to be someone's child to show them that they matter and show them that you care about them. And more than anything else that was given to him, it seemed to me that he thinks that model and that love was a driving force. So him trying to replicate that for other people is something I think is interesting. It's obviously not scalable for a one-man to one-to-one situation, but I think it's important for us all to remind ourselves that we don't have to have a ton of money. We don't have to have some big world-beating idea. That if we can just be there for people that we know and that we care about, that means a lot more. It's hard to measure. It's probably hard to raise money around something like that, but it's important.
Yeah.
It's so important. And I think you're right about the scale that you talked about. I think oftentimes we think if we're not fixing 10,000 people's lives, then we didn't make a difference. And that's just simply not true. It only takes one person's life. And to your point, you don't have to bring someone in your house to impact and influence them in a positive way. Even if it's, you're walking down the street and there's a homeless person and you're coming from a restaurant and you have your bag of food left over in your hand and you decide to give it to them. You don't have to take it home. Like that one meal could mean everything to that person in that moment. So to your point, sometimes small things are big things. And so it's not about holding ourselves accountable for changing the world at scale, but recognizing that each unique moment will eventually make long and lasting results for society. Thabo, I want to ask you, I want to talk to you about a statement that you made after your trial that was public. So I'll just read the statement, which said, "We are all aware that there are still too many cases of police brutality today. So many of these cases go unnoticed or unreported. So many victims do not have the means to fight for justice as I could. It's unfair." And you also acknowledge that you were fortunate to have a great team of attorneys, which, as we just discussed on this call, we know some people don't have access to that. So why did you feel that it was important to make that statement and give back to the public defender community after your trial?
For me, it was about being able to have an impact, just understanding the system. And I think public defenders, just by being able to help on a case-to-case basis, it can change a life. Because the, evil in what we see is not necessarily, and I'm not trying to compare at all, but it's not necessarily, and it's not just the physical violence. When you take a man, to jail, and you leave the kids behind, and you leave, a wife that now has to do the job of both, the parents and the mother. You're disrupting communities, and that's the problem. Obviously, what we see on TV, other cases where the victim dies, unfortunately, or something terrible happens. But the majority of the problem, is just the senseless sending of black men going to jail, time after time after time. It's not necessarily in a violent way, but it's a true crime that they're doing against the community. So by helping Gideon Promises and public defenders, I believe that it makes an impact on a case-to-case basis. And like we said, it's not about changing the world at once, but doing something positive, for another human being.
That's right. And I think that, to your point, when families experience this level of trauma, that also translates to mental health issues that are going to be impacted by the family. When you see your father removed from the home and doesn't return for a period of time, or your mother is struggling with several children just to make ends meet and just to put food on the table, over time that plays into mental health. And we know that's a huge stigma in the Black community. And so I think these public defenders are not just dealing with what's immediately in front of them, the cases that are on their desks, but they're also having to deal with the trauma and the aftermath of what these incidences are bringing to them as they help their clients work through these issues. So it's tough work, and I do appreciate you for championing these defenders, because again, like I keep saying, they put their whole lives on the line to help others, and it's critically important for our community specifically. Champ, sporting figures are researching and deciding to put their financial resource behind nonprofits that are on the front lines during these very interesting and unprecedented times. So tell us, why did you specifically choose Gideon's Promise of all organizations, and what attracted you to public defenders, and how have you interacted with the public defender community?
Well, the attraction came really through mutual relationships. And I mean, it's just like, any business venture, it's always through somebody that I trust or, do business with. It's no different with the charities I work with. A mutual friend of ours introduced me, and, I came to like the people there and what they did, obviously. But, to work with a group of organization, you got to like the people, and what they do definitely matters. But if you're going to work hand in hand, you better be in sync. And, I think being there and watching them go through some of their classes and sitting in on those, just the detail that they put behind their work. I mean, that the time and resources that they have are put into it to the max. And, everybody that's there, they appreciate it. And it starts to resonate with you how important it is when you actually get in there and feel what they do. And I was impressed. And since then, I've always tried to find a way that I can help them raise the funds that they need to continue to do the work they do. So there's, things I'm working on now to help them even more. Our, fundraising event got canceled in March, but I plan to be there for the next one whenever we can do that. So, it's just one group of many that, I really respect, but, I'm definitely attach my name to them as much as I can, and try to help others along the way.
Well, I know everybody at Gideon's Promise is so appreciative for that, especially because of the community that they're trying to build. They're trying to make sure public defenders do not feel alone. And the mentorship piece is so important, because there's a range of folks in Gideon's Promise that have been defenders for 20 plus years and brand new public defenders. And I think it's important for the mentorship and the sessions that you talked about with sharing thought leadership. All of that is important as we cultivate this culture of defenders that are really looking after our people. This question I'm going to ask for all three of you. I think all of you can add perspective to the table. From your perspectives, do most athletes find it difficult to share criminal justice experiences that they've had with respective teammates or team owners? So whether they were guilty of what they were accused of or not, how hard is it for them to bring those things to the teammates and the team owners when they're actually playing ball? And this is for all three. So Domonique, let's start with you.
I never really saw it being difficult. Like, to be honest with you, if something was in the paper, if somebody had something, your teammates was gonna bring it up to you first of all. And it would probably be to make fun of you, but then it eventually would mature into a real conversation about what happened. I'm not sure with, to be frank with you, the people who own the teams and sometimes even the coaches and general managers, like, they view the players as cogs in a machine. So, and the same thing was true in college also. So I don't think they care necessarily about the experience as much as they cared about how it would impact their availability for the team. So I never really got into any trouble. So maybe the conversations were different for people who got into those situations, but I only saw it as like, oh, how many weeks are we going to be missing this guy? It wasn't necessarily about, so how did this come about? And I do think that guys who are supremely talented, they'll go through great lengths to find ways to make sure that they don't find themselves in trouble again. And I think the players can benefit from that, obviously. But not for 1 second, I convinced myself that any of these higher ups in these organizations actually care about the experience or the player themselves. There may be incidences where they do, but I think it's a mistake if you go in believing that they actually do care about what happens with you and how your experience was any more than they care about what you can contribute to the organization. But I have been a part of some pretty interesting and intense conversations between teammates about run-ins with the police.
Wow, now that's very deep what you just shared with us, because essentially what you're saying is that oftentimes ball players are seen as a commodity and really just a means to generate revenue for a franchise versus as a human being that has a life journey that may have ups and downs. And so I think for our listeners, I think that's a very important message that Domonique just shared with us. And I think it's important to know that if you are pursuing a career in professional sports, that you are not seeking family members, but you're understanding that you're on a job. And so you've got to have a network of people around you that love you and care for you beyond the ones that are giving you a paycheck.
I mean, I think that within the team, it's very different. I know when I was a rookie in Denver, like Champ took care of me like I was his brother. It was amazing. He had no reason to. He's Hall of Fame destined player, and I'm just a third round pick, and he looked out for me. And I think that you can find that relationship within your teams, and maybe you can also find it within coaches or something, but I think it's unrealistic to have that expectation. I think it's fair to have that expectation with your teammates, but it's unrealistic to have the expectation of anybody else, because they're not incentivized to do that. They're incentivized to get the most out of you, not to make the best for you.
Yeah.
Wow. And so Champ, does that resonate with you? Do you agree? Do you have a different perspective?
Absolutely.
Nah, he got a different experience. He was a first round pick. He was Hall of Famer, Pro Bowl every year. They actually cared about him.
This is what I'm used to right here. You see?
Did they care about you, Champ, since you had all of that fancy stuff going on?
Domonique said it right. They don't care about you. When you can't do nothing for them, no, they don't care. You're just another product to them. You know, you build relationships within that organization or whatever. Those things come organically, but at the end of the day, it's all about what you can do for me now, because, you know, this is an investment. You know, we're not going to invest in that if it's not going to get us a good return. It's business. So we know that sort of going in. And, you know, just to kind of piggyback on what he said, yeah, guys, you're already in the public eye. So it's kind of hard to not tell your team, or you won't get outed some type of way. But I do see guys when they go back home get into a lot of things, you know, and that's sort of the thing that I see more than anything, is when guys go back home and then they get tangled up in the law, and, you know, they try to hide it or keep it out of the public eye. But I mean, once you're in the league, man, everybody knows who you are. So you carry that responsibility with you. I know one of my older teammates, just maybe 09 or 2010, I don't remember, but I remember he got in trouble, and, you know, instantly, because of what he was accused of, bam, he's guilty in public eye. Like, everybody is gonna assume he's guilty. So first thing I said was, man, we got to get you an attorney, period. Like, I don't care if you're guilty or not. We got to make sure you have the best chance to make sure you're properly represented. I don't care what anybody thinks. You get a good attorney. He did that. He ended up getting off and playing about 5 more years. So, I mean, he was fortunate enough to have that. And it's crazy how things work out. But, you know, he was able to overcome it. And if you're out there playing and doing good things, people forget about that stuff. You know,
but we've seen instances where that can, we've seen instances where that can ruin a person's career.
Absolutely.
Especially if they don't have the right legal team. And you know, I talked about Michael Vick. I watched a special about him recently. Most of us saw it, but it was just so interesting to watch a player who had everything going for him in terms of his career trajectory encounter an issue that involved a legal issue that really changed the whole trajectory of his career, and it never was the same. Although he had an opportunity to play again after he served his time, I will say that he was not able to rebound and to achieve the success where he left. And that happens, and that's a very real thing. Thabo, for you, let me just ask it to you a little bit differently, since you actually went through a situation that was public and was made public. From your perspective, you know, how was it? You know, I think you had some teammates that were actually there with you when it was transpiring and taking place, but how did they react, and how supportive were they of you throughout all of the turmoil that you faced during that time?
Well, I had the great coach Mike Bunahoser, the whole Darvingham was the assistant coach. I mean, the whole team was great. Just checking out on me and being there for me, supportive from the very start. But as far as like organization and ownership and all this, it's not like you go and eat with them every Sunday or anything like this. So it's business but as far as my teammates and the coaching staff, they were great, and I was very fortunate for that.
Great. This will be the last question I ask to every single panelist, and then I'm going to open it up for Q&A. So for those that are watching this and tuning in, please be sure to write your questions in the Q&A chat so that I can address your questions directly to our panelists. So the last question, how do athletes like Muhammad Ali, Jim Brown, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, how do they plant seeds for sports figures to take a stance against social and criminal justice issues?
Well, I'll take that one. I think the best thing that can happen for a young Black man is a great example. Just somebody that you can look at and kind of compare yourself to. And, those are the guys that kind of set the bar. And you got to imagine they're in the height of their careers, and they're risking everything for everybody else that looks like them. I mean, you can't, that's why when I think about how they were treated in those moments and how people look down on them, but for some reason, even with Kaepernick, I mean, which is more recent, like, why did it take 4 years for people to realize how harmless what he was doing, how harmless it was and how great it was, how he sacrificed everything for that moment, and the awareness that came after that. I mean, this is the same thing that these guys were doing. And now we were, frowned upon by mentioning his name in the same breath as those guys. But I'm like, I mean, it is what it is. As a Black man, these are the examples that we look to, and they keep getting, shunned, trying to do the bigger thing and, stand up for the greater good. And, I mean, those guys, I can never be them. And I'm not trying to be. I just want to do my part, but they definitely set the bar.
It did set the bar. And I think about a player like Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf in the National Basketball Association.
Oh, yeah.
He did what Kaepernick did 25 years ago. And Thabo actually had an opportunity to sit on a panel with him when we were both at the Atlanta Hawks franchise. I hosted a symposium that was all around sports figures, and we had Mahmoud there. And so Thabo, from your perspective, how would you answer that question? I mean, even sharing a stage with him and hearing his perspective on why he decided to use his platform. I mean, his career was gone after that moment. He never was able to get back into the game, but he felt like it was worth it. He felt like it was worth putting his whole entire career on the line. So, how do you see these guys and their ability to use their platform for social change?
Well, I think those are the examples, people that are willing to sacrifice for others and for something that they believe in and something that's just, and you can see the sports figure, and you can look also at, political figure, maybe like Nelson Mandela, and those people, I think keep the name, throughout the time, because for what they stood for. And Mahmoud is an example of it. Muhammad Ali, I think, is a great example of, for what he stood for and who he stood against. I think at the time where, people were being sent to war, to take that stand. So I applaud them, and they definitely paved the way. And I think it's on us, to carry that torch and try to pass it to the next generation and just do what we can while we're here.
Well, you all are definitely passing the torch and making us all proud. So So thank you so much for your leadership. Domonique, I'll close it out with you. Same question. What was their impact? What was the impact of these actions, and how does utilizing your platform for social change make a difference?
I think that they set an example that everyone could follow. And I think when you said Mahmoud, it made me think about Craig Hodges too, is another guy who I remember being outspoken during that time. And we can't forget like the WNBA and Maya Moore, who's given up her career to fight for social justice. Several WNBA players have. And frankly, the WNBA was on the front line before in supporting Kaepernick before many other sports were. So I think it's important, and it often happens in the movement for social justice, or any movement, frankly, that Black women are powering it, but they're not necessarily the face of it. So I think it's important to celebrate them also and appreciate the sacrifices that they are making. But you made the point earlier that every little bit helps. And I think that it's important to understand that that's true on the other side. Every little bit hurts, and like all the minor things that are happening to set us as a country back, those things are taking place, and those things unfortunately are kind of on cruise control. They exist in a system that doesn't even necessarily need someone to push a lever to continue to disenfranchise a group of people. So it's important that we do the big things when we can, and not just look to athletes to lead this, or not just look to politicians to lead this. For all of us to, when given the opportunity, as much as possible, to try to do those little things, if it's as small as giving something, as you mentioned, to a homeless person, or giving some words of encouragement to somebody that you know. Like, those things matter too, just as much as writing big checks to nonprofits like Champ does, because he's super rich.
Well, Champ, give me $5 if that's the
I ain't got it. Don't listen to him.
Well, thank you for those words, Domonique. And I also appreciate you for bringing up the WNBA and recognizing that athletes are not just men. We have a lot of women that are athletes that are using their platform for change and to make a difference. And so, as I said in the beginning, this is not a Black issue. This is not a white issue. This is not a male issue. This is not a female issue. This is a human rights issue. And athletes play the most important part because of your platforms and your ability to touch society at such scale in such a big way. So what I'll do now is turn to the audience for Q&A, and we've got some great questions that I can tee up. And so our first question is from Liz, and Liz asked this question to Champ and Domonique. Both of you were recognized for your community work by being named Walter Payton NFL Man of the Year nominees during your time with the Broncos. What advice would you give to current NFL players about how best to utilize their platforms or to make a difference?
Well, first and foremost, I would encourage everybody to just learn, research things, listen, gather as much information as possible, and do what you're compelled to do. I go back to what I said earlier about thrusting that burden upon guys. I think if you don't know what you want to do, just learn, listen. I think guys become more compelled, and it's a little more organic to do it that way than to just throw yourself into something you have no idea what's going on. And that, I've experienced that early in my career, just trying to do things for the sake of doing things. But it's like, where can you have the most impact? Who can you influence the most? People are watching, so what you do matters. So at least go into it with the right information.
Yeah, I think Champ nailed it with making sure you are serious about it if you're gonna get involved. Like, you can give money and be silent if that's what you want to do. You can do nothing, frankly, if that's what you want to do. But I would hate for people to get involved in something that they don't believe in because they believe that's what they're supposed to do.
And I think Domonique is absolutely right. We have to be authentic, and we have to be honest about what we care about. And we can't allow for external pressure to make us get involved in issues that are not core to who we are, or essentially in our heart, because it will show. And I think the lack of authenticity actually alienates people, and it makes them not want to be around you, or not desire to engage with your brand.
You
So
said it better anyway.
no.
Glad my battery died.
She did. She definitely did.
I was wasting time. You can answer all my questions from here on out.
Stop it. Okay, Champ, this next question is for you, and it comes from Amari. Amari wants to know, when you were with the Washington football team, were there internal discussions about the team name, and did it cause any strife on the team?
Not at all. I would say -1%. No, they didn't. There was never any talk about the team name. You know, I'm young, so I don't know any better. You know, at that time, it was never a discussion. It might have been talked about in other circles, but in that locker room, never became an issue.
What do you think of it, of the name change, if I can ask? What do you think of it?
You know, it's funny, we're talking about this with Domonique because we talked about this a couple years ago. You know, we were talking about how disrespectful it is to the Native community, and we had this discussion. I've been on record, you know, giving my opinion about it, and I thought it was always wrong. But you know, this is a great step, and we see what it takes to make change, money. And when you start taking people's money, they start listening.
We are almost about to close, but I would like to ask gentlemen on this call to leave us with your words of inspiration for the public defender community. If you had to, you know, there are a lot of people on this call. We have hundreds right now that are tuned in, and they are on the front lines of this work, and they are inspired by each and every one of you and how you've been using your platform to elevate what they do. So what words of inspiration can you leave them with so that they can continue to fight this good fight for everyone that needs them? Thabo, let's start with you.
Well, first I want to say thank you on behalf of all the families and people that you help, and also just keep doing the work. It's you know, it's appreciated and it's needed in time like this, and you know, hopefully for not much longer. Hopefully, you know, real change is coming, and the police and DA will send less cases. But until then, I mean, you know, just you know, we appreciate what you do, and you know, I will still be here to help and continue helping for sure.
Thank you. Domonique.
I think it's just to let everybody know and let them know that we're all working together. I imagine that working in the public defender's office occasionally gets lonely, and you are by yourself doing the research that you need to do to defend somebody who can't afford to pay you for the amount that you deserve for the work that you're doing. And I imagine in those moments it's very difficult, but I just say to understand that we all have those moments, those of us who are trying to push for some improvement in this country's justice system and improvement in this society in general. We all have those moments, and we all see that you guys have those moments. So I just say to them, in those moments, think about that there is a team out there, while we may not be there in that moment pushing the same way that you are. We also experience that, and we want to make sure that they feel encouraged and motivated to keep going, because it is not just that person's life on the line that they are defending, but it is our broader society. What it's going to become is dependent on efforts by people like them.
Thank you. Champ, final words.
Yes, the guy said it great. I mean, it's really just keep doing the work. You know, I think I can personally say that I'll continue to use my resources, my time, and my money to help give them a better shot at doing what they do. You know, I think that's the most important thing I think all of us can do, is just continue to support people that are on the ground doing the good work. And, you know, put our money where our mouth is and our time where our mouth is, and, you know, just watch things unfold. And, you know, for anybody with Gideon's Promise and coming up through the program, I mean, just keep doing the work. We're here. We love what you do. I think we just need to keep spreading the word, how important the work is, and, you know, we'll start seeing the results.
Well, thank you so much. And to all the panelists, I mean, you have just really inspired us today. You all come from such different perspectives, which I think is important. I think that's really where learning begins, when you begin to lean into diversity and inclusion and understand different perspectives, and then ultimately decide where you land on issues. But I'll just say that in both sports and the criminal justice system, people are often judged by their jersey or the jumpsuit that they wear. And we know that there is a lot more to individuals than just a number. As sporting figures continue to raise awareness to the realization of equity, fairness, and the changing narrative, it's on our hearts and on the minds of so many people right now and always. People who want to support the change in this country that it desperately needs are now empowered and have a platform to do so. Each one of our panelists is bridging these gaps and is committed to be a facilitator of that change. So thank you, Thabo. Thank you, Domonique. Thank you, Champ. And thank you to Gideon's Promise for this amazing event. Have a great night, and we hope to see you again soon.